We can also open up the roundtable discussion, but we wanted to speak again about the experience of smell inside exhibitions and the emptiness also, and the invisibility and immateriality connected with. And just starting and speaking about my own experience with this exhibition, I just found out that there's no conventions about smell exhibitions. So, of course, I was nervous because I'm used to imagine exhibitions. If you speak about photography, video, even sound installation, I arrived getting them into my mind, and a week before the opening, this was not the case with this exhibition, because all of the smells, the scents, and everything came together in the space, and then you add up, and one after the other starts. But then it becomes tricky, because you have this overlapping effects, from sound installations. But of course, just 3 days before the opening, you get the idea what the exhibition is about. And so I was interested also in your experience. I know Jim did a lot of smell exhibitions, and you participated in a lot of smell exhibitions. What your experience was, and how you started organizing them, and what your impressions have been.
Yeah, well, I started writing about smell art before curating. And I think for me at the beginning, it was just important to see that my intuition that artists had been interested in smell for a long time, to see if it was really true. And so I did a kind of a thorough research of art history, artist writings, reading as much as I could, but then also looking through the current literature on artists, and just began picking out artists here and there, or artworks that had dealt with smell. And then dealing with, actually curating it, I think I took a little different approach than the current show. This is a show in Philadelphia called Odor Limits, and it was a small space, so to have works overlap wouldn't have been very conducive to the experience. So all the artworks, and Clara was in the show, Oswaldo was in the show, and some other people that I presented. But so we had to make the works so that they were contained. Oswaldo had a room, Clara had a video, a smell map was the other event. It was more interactive. And then Oswaldo also had a piece with garbage cans. So you could lift up the lid of the garbage can to smell aspects of the piece. So they were all kind of more or less contained. And so, just because the space was so small. But I think it was successful because it kind of activated different engagements with the smell. Because in one, you had to walk around the neighborhood and sniff. Oswaldo's, you had to lift up the cans. Clara's, you had to look at the video and kind of imagine what the smells were like. And the other one was Chrysan's Stathakos, where you could get the little smell multiple. So you could take a smell home and use it at home. So I like the different kind of behaviors about smell that you could enact with that show, that diversity of approaches. But I think what's really interesting too is your creation of this conference with both smell scientists and the artists. And I'm keen to kind of think through how artists actually are able to use the olfactory science, but then not be dependent on the outcomes of that the scientists are looking for. The scientists seem to be, trying to focus on deterministic outcomes for smell, whereas the artists are looking at creative, enlargements of what smell can do. So maybe could either of you talk about, or Luca, talk about how you work with scientists?
Well, I can carry on talking. I think we walk into a smell. I come from a sculpture point of view, and I think each artist working with different way into smell. I am no chemics, I am no biology, I am no perfumer. I respect all that kind of fields, but I use a smell as a medium to help to create the question I am interested in. And as a sculpture, a smell, as I mentioned before, is volume. You can weight moleculars, so you can modeling in the space. You can have different intensities on the space as you can fill the space with moleculars in cubic meters. So I am interested in how to. Luca was talking about the invisibility of the things, invisibility because we are ocular centric, but the room is full of molecules and they can touch your emotion, I can touch your perception, I can actually take you to different places. You can have a good engagement through a smell. So if you know how to guide the molecules in the space, you can engage intellectually with the brain, with the receiver we were talking before, the perceiver, the receiver, the perception, the senses. So yeah, I think each of the artists came into the smell for a different way, but I think for me, olfactory art is a part of the installation and sculpture language. And the word perfume is through fume smoke, so through smells, through perfume, through the smoke you're talking. You know, the smell is a medium, it's nothing else. So we put it the molecules and you can speak.
Yes. Yes. And yes, I think that almost the same thing. I mean, when I use music, it doesn't mean that I'm a musician or for other kind of media that I use for my art. My problem is to be an artist and to use images or not images like smell, but how to involve myself in a space and how can I talk to the public through my work from a space. And when I thought to use a smell for the first time with a real smell that to put in a show in 2000 with the smell of the sea, I asked the help to a company that used to work on this way. When I try to do a smell of something that has no smell, like for the biennial, I work with a person that is doing really smell. So a nose, no, or a perfumers. So in that case, before in '89, early '90s, I start to use it with popular music. I start to ask help to an an anthropologist that works on music, no, to understand which kind of music I could use for my show. So I think that the interesting thing about using art for our interest and our job is this idea to involve relationship with people that use other languages and how these other languages could we involve to do a sculpture or to do an artwork.
I guess that means I've got to talk now. And I've forgotten the question already. No, but it was something around how you work with scientists. Is that correct? Yeah. So I would agree that my approach is very much from an artist's perspective, and my training also was sculptural, so it comes from that. I feel more and more as time goes on and there's this whole research practice culture that's happening in art schools. And also with the pandemic, more and more I want to assert that I'm an artist. Because more and more as a discipline, that's people, you know, it's under threat. Basically, being an artist is under threat from other disciplines. and because art schools are more and more becoming part of universities as a discipline, we're more and more having to prove ourselves as social scientists or as some kind of scientific discipline. So more and more I want to assert I am an artist rather than a researcher. But okay, that's me digressing. In terms of how I work with scientists, I think of myself more as a witch than a scientist with what I do. And when I go into labs, because often I have to go into labs to realize work technically, or I might want to go into a lab such as a cross-modal. I spent a semester at Oxford in the cross-modal sensory research lab, which is part of the cognitive psychology department, for example. And when I went in there for a semester, I felt like I was observing the observers. That's my approach to working with scientists. And I really respect what they do because, you know, without them, I couldn't do. I need their expertise, but at the same time, I'm also coming in with an analysis that comes from feminism when I'm looking at science, and I'm looking at it as a story, the way that someone like Donna Haraway, who is trained as a feminist historian of science, would go in and look. And I'm looking at those stories and looking at the ideologies behind them, if that makes sense. So I don't know if that answers your question. I kind of digressed a wee bit, but yeah.
I'm not an artist, I'm an exhibition maker. So for me, it's not so interesting, the question if it's natural, if it's artificial. Do you work with scientists? Because I also don't ask, let's say, a painter or a photographer with which camera did you took the photo. Was it a 400 lumen film you put in the camera? Where did you produce the photos, and what kind of paper? It's 250 gram paper, etc., etc. I think this is questions. I'm not interested as an art historian. Yeah, probably it's the old school art historian. For them, it's very important, but for me, it's not. It's only about the artwork, you know. So I'm not questioning all the production because we know it. You mentioned Marcel Duchamp very often, because it's not interesting in the 21st century who is the producer of something. The only interesting thing is who had the idea and what is the idea. And that for me, when we were thinking about the exhibition, it was okay. We come from a different background. Thomas is now director in the museum, and I'm head of an art department in the museum, and we are confronted with completely different and new obstacles working in the museum. For example, Klimaanlage, air condition. Yeah. Okay. So this is the first obstacle when you do this kind of exhibition. No. So in Innsbruck we can't do this exhibition in the museum because the restoration department says impossible with all the old masters in our house. We can't do the show there. So, but for us and for you as artists who want to shift always the border of an art piece, and we who want to shift the border, what is an exhibition? Yeah, these are existential questions, at least for me, you know, how we can push the border of a museum, you know. And the interesting thing for me is because now we are all confronted with, barrierefreie language and stuff like this. This is a good thing of this exhibition. You go there and there are no texts. No text. How boring is it to go in a museum, in the beginning you get the text and then you walk with the text and you look if everything who's in the text you can see in the sculpture and in the painting. I hate this because to go into an art exhibition is a visual experience, but we lost this in the last 20, 30 years. That we go into an exhibition and that it has to be a visual thing. Even, if you watch a painting, there's a painting behind the painting, And the sculpture, there's a sculpture behind the sculpture. And this is a good thing about this exhibition. You smell something and you have to produce your own work in form that you have to think about it,
This is the natural thing of a smell. Smell, you finish the piece in your brain.
Yeah.
And that's the reason why I found fascinating to use as a media. It's because it's not the whole picture. It's not a vision when the thing is already described and you have to finish the piece. That's the natural of a smell. Yeah. So that's a kind of interesting approach. It's interesting to listen to you to talk about the technical part of the museum. You cannot make the exhibition because the aircon of the museum will be green. It's the same thing as a museum organizer when they started with Bill Viola producing videos. Before museums and galleries have a huge window lighting, natural light, and after, they have to do that room because they have projections. So they have to adapt the museums to these kind of exhibitions and shows. I think with the smell, they have to learn as well the process of how to deal with these kind of molecules in the space. And you have the air comp, will be another way to present and work on the way it can be isolated and controlled. Yeah, and I have to tell you, you need to know about that. It's not something you walk in the smell without any knowledge. It's a lot of knowledge already there. So it's not like you working, I could bring a lot of molecules, put it here, and that's it. No, it's a smell pollution. It's something people get freak out with some particular molecules. It's something. It's a complexity behind that. It's really complex. The thing of the smell is not an easy thing to appropriate in that use it without any knowledge. You need to know. You need to know because some people is allergic. I remember I make an exhibition in Chisenhall Gallery when I used a lot of peppermint and it was like a wall for some people. They cannot walk in because they are allergic and it's a kind of certain condition. It's a physiological thing. A smell is no vision. A smell is no sound. A smell is something else. So it's more complex than that. I know you're interested from exhibition point of view, but they demanding some knowledge. We were talking about that, about how you fill a room with molecules in a place and how you're going to have a machine for 8 days or a month pumping molecules. You fill in the space, more the expected. It's a
No, but it makes no difference if you know it or you ask a specialist to know it. So. The artist doesn't have to know it. This is what we know since Marcel Duchamp, right? You have to find somebody who can translate your idea into the art piece. But you as an artist doesn't have to know how many times the evaporator has to pump something into the room. If you don't interested in this, you have a professional who can exactly tell you how many.
You collaborate it, and after 20 years, you know the basic of that kind of stuff. You pay technician to do that.
You can be a painter without painting a painting. That is a good thing about art.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep. But the most interesting, also from the perception of the exhibition or how you perceive the exhibition is also for myself. It's a totally dynamic event in this case, which not the case if you do kind of photography or installation exhibition, because it constantly changes its intensity. And it was really interesting to to experience by doing guided tours or different events, how the airflow of the architecture and the museum changes, how the intensity changes. So it's also, Clara mentioned it yesterday in her talk, that as an artist you also give up, or you open up the frame in a bit. You define what kind of smell you like to have, but how the smell appears in the space is kind of something where you have to lose. I also imagine certain definitions you normally do by framing a photograph or framing a painting, for example, or what you think.
I want to make sure I understood that. So do you mean because of the subjectivity in
the subjectivity of the visitor? That's first thing, as we learned also from the scientific lectures today again. But also a video installation, you just switch it on, and it's there as it is meant to be, with the projector used, etc. But with the smell, you have the diffuser, but how the smell behaves in the space is dependent on how many people enter into the space. If you're alone, if you're with a group, if your diffuser was activated an hour ago and his is activated every 5 minutes. So you can really feel how it overlaps, of course, in a negative sense, you could say, but also in a positive sense, that it creates kind of an openness also and a constant different perception of the exhibition, which is interesting.
Yeah, I guess it's exactly like a performance. I think of it as somewhere between performance and sculpture, because there's a volume. It takes up space the way a sculpture would in terms of what you call volume. But then there's also a time element to it, which is like performance. And it's ephemeral. And then just as you were talking there, I don't know why, but I thought about weather. That it's kind of like weather, it changes. Your experience of the if you think of the room as a place or where it's located as a place, it's variable like weather, maybe. I think that's how I would describe it. Yeah. I don't know if anybody else has a different experience of it.
Yeah, I mean, I would almost say that smells are almost sentient in themselves. You know, there's a dynamism, there's an aliveness to them, there's an animated quality to them that, they kind of interact with our bodies and our minds and our senses. And so they become almost like a co-partner with, less like a material, like a raw material, than more like a co-partner in the aesthetic experience. It's interesting, when I first started writing about olfactory art, I was, of course, writing about artists, but then I kept being drawn into architecture and writing about architecture because it seems like there's never a pure scent experience. Scent is always a kind of a hybrid form because there's the technology, there's the architecture, there's, maybe a quest for a pure scent experience, but you're always situated in a place. And so that's why I find this exhibition very interesting, because the architecture is used in several different ways. There's a floor piece where the floor becomes pronounced. Oswaldo has the curtains around his space. The diffusers are everywhere, and then there's the mothballs in the ceiling. So you're really the visitor is really forced to be attendant to all the different aspects of architecture, and even the windows with Sissel's piece. So being vented out into the world outside. So the architecture becomes also a friend, or come paint a frame, kind of compatriot, with the artworks themselves.
And probably sometime we have an architecture that already exists, and so you have to move in that space to create the situation to expose, to present a work like that one, like with a smell. But also, as Florian told me last night, that could be very interesting to see. I'm very curious to see the show in Innsbruck because they built the space for the show. So they create the rooms and the corridor in the rooms, how the space is divided and used to create the show. And that could be something that usually doesn't work or doesn't exist because we work in a museum with the already existing spaces. And that is something that probably, I don't know how news is, but it's something different, no? That is, I think, from the beginning to try to do the space for the show. Of course, we have to also to learn to the people that are working in the museum that is a work or a show about smell. Mm-hmm. Last year, I did a show about smell, where from the show there was only Jason Dodge and me in Venice during the period of Biennale. The day before the opening, we were doing everything, preparing everything for the day after, for the party of the opening, and all of us, or most of all of us, increase the smell, because we know that during an opening more people will be there, and so it's difficult then to feel all the smell, so it's better to give more. When we arrived the day after, around 11 o'clock in the morning, there was no smell in the space. We asked, but why? And the workers said, we changed the air for the opening because it was too...
Too powerful.
Okay, but now you destroyed everything. So it's like for a video show, and then you open you make on all the light, and so the show disappeared. Yeah. And so nobody, first of all, us probably, the curator, the director of the space, didn't say anything to the workers to say, be careful, don't open windows. Yes. And that was the tragedy of the opening. Yeah. It was almost at the end not so good.
Or scented products that are used to clean the floors and things like that you don't normally think about, like, unless you're really aware of it or used to working with smell, then you've got to tell the people that clean floors and so on, okay, don't use anything scented, painting the walls in advance, those sorts of things, because paint has a smell, and normally every show the walls are painted. All these sorts of things that people don't think about unless they work with scent. Yeah,
that's what I say. Is you cannot walk into the smell without experience. Anyway, you have to know it's some basic knowledge, not basic knowledge. It's a knowledge into this kind of thing. There was an exhibition in Basel in Tangley Museum when they had to change all the filters because the structure of the building. I didn't know that. No one knew that. They had to change the whole thing because the whole system was connected to the office and the whole smell was in the office. And, and everybody said, my goodness, we cannot have that. So it sounds like a silly thing, but no, it's knowledge behind that anyway. That's what we say. We have to deal with professional people in that to make sure, molecules as control and all that kind of issues. Molecular can go sticking into the painting and all that kind of stuff. So it's not something to improvise. As it's very old, 300 years, knowledge and science behind that kind of stuff. It's good to know if you walk in that. It's not like you say, not to know what kind of camera is and stuff like that. Well, people do iPhone things, they don't need to know about how the photograph is. Yes, we know about the concept behind and all that kind of thing, but in a smell is different. Smell is more complex and it's another thing. Yeah, I think.
Maybe we can also open up.
Open
or
up.
Comments or questions, experience with smell, installations? Ja. Ich glaube, wir haben alle Mikrofone vorne. Ich gebe Ihnen mal meins.
My question would go to Thomas Thiel as a curator of the show. I would be curious to know about public reactions from museum visitors to this exhibition, since it's still kind of unusual, I think, and probably you have visitors of all kinds, also people who were not acquainted with this phenomenon of smell in art. And I'm curious if this is more appealing to people, because everybody has experience with smell, also people not so expert in art. So I'm curious about the success of this kind of curatorial approach.
Yeah, I mean, there's different levels of it. So for example, by guided tours, I realized it's much more direct speaking about the smells and experience it. And people come up very personally with impressions and as we heard today from their childhood, just to mention one, the grass or the Heu of Jason Dodge pieces. The one of the pieces which was always meant to lose the smell over time, more and more, and which is an event that happened in the past, immediately triggers. And then there's also very sensible visitors who are, after 3-4 spaces, have enough and need a pause, and others, of course, as we also learned today, who lost the smelling, who are not maybe disappointed, but where you realize they don't get the exhibitions, no? They don't experience the exhibition as they could have. And for most of the people, it's the first time they experience scent and smell apart from all-day experience and the perfume industry. And that's very interesting. I mean, only, I would say, Luca's smell is going into direction of a perfume, or using elements of it, so the sweetness of it. But all the others have a totally different scent, or I would say also scents maybe apart from Pamela Rosenkrantz, you didn't experience much. So especially when it comes to very personal aspects like Carsten Höller's father and mother. So that's something I can say. But I realize also that the emptiness of the exhibition spaces is something which, of course, is experienced for a lot of people in the first instance, there's nothing. So if you walk into 1 or 2 spaces, but immediately, if the scent the spaces are filled, then the people become also kind of fascinated. So and continue if they can make it. So it's also was in the beginning, or as I mentioned, organizing it already interesting, and it's also by observing the exhibition is very interesting. Yeah.
I've been there more than 20 times upstairs. I think more than 20 times, because I'm losing what I'm smelling. When I see something, I can have it there in my brain, but with smell, it's totally different. I'm going there, and each and every time, it's a different exhibition to me, because of the smell is mixing up, the scents are mixing together, and I go there and want to have eternity in what I'm smelling there. And it's very, very difficult. That's not possible that. So it's a very special experience, and it's a great experience. Thank you very much, all of you.
Oswaldo, if I recall correctly, you said in your talk that smell is democratic. Is that correct? Did you say that?
Yeah.
Then it would be interesting to me what all of the others of your elaborate round would answer to that. If they agree or if they disagree, would be very interesting to me.
Yeah, I was framing in an expression I heard many years ago in a conference about smell as a democratic sense. It's referring to smell, whatever we propose, will be finished in the mind of the person. Simple example, I did a course in India on smell and perfume. And we were talking about distillation of mint. And it's fascinating because if you say mint in Marruecos, people think in tea. If you say mint in Italy, basil is a mint. You think in pizza. You say mint in different parts of the world means something else. So mint, as we think ourselves in our skull, in our heads, think, yes, mint is that. But for each person, it's something different. The same with the molecules. Molecules will be triggering different parts of the brain depending on where you come from, your physiological stage. So thus, I was agree with that expression of, it's quite democratic in the way the smell talk to you and your brain will finish the image of the molecular. So that's the reason I think it was it's kind of personal, direct communication. And from the art point of view, what is interesting is you don't doctrinate anyone to tell it, it's that's what I think. No, I just propose something. Museums, hundreds of people visiting, coming from different parts of the world. They have a different kind of, I call it library of smell to articulate it, whatever idea is on the table. So for sure, each person will read each piece totally different. And we propose questions. We don't say things. We just make a frame for thinking. We are not, in my opinion, I am not precise when I talk with a smell. I am no perfume here. I just put ideas together. They allow me to question other issues. So it's quite open questions what we do with the smell. I don't know if you, Jim, want to open a extended democratic sense of smell.
In my talk, I talk about smell being a populist sense. And that is because scent works don't really have an elaborate art historical relationship to history and many examples and so forth. That may change soon with more shows like this, more sophisticated kind of experiences as with the artists we have here. That may change. There may become a more sophisticated vocabulary and precedents and maybe even a canon of olfactory artworks. But I agree with Oswaldo in the sense of questions. I talk about sensory predicaments, and that is very similar. They're the questions. The answers are open-ended. The answers can only be subjective. So, and I think it requires a certain type of visitor to come to an exhibition like this. When it is different every time you come, that's not going to appeal to a visitor who wants stability or certainty. They want to see, the hallmarks of the collection, every time they come by. So it's going to change, I think, audience behavior a little bit to be more open-ended, be more tolerant, to not be, to thrive on a kind of indeterminate experience. rather than being kind of told or something didactic.
Which in a way is sophisticated, rather than not being sophisticated. For me, it's more, that way of, that more open-ended situation, because I guess it's a situation, it's not an object in that kind of way, is quite sophisticated, or more sophisticated than we'd think, perhaps.
Well, a thought just came up in that, visitors also will become researchers. I mean, you're researchers too. When you look at smell, you're working with, various professionals. You're conducting your study of scent to make your works. But then visitors will also have to become researchers, to figure out, well, what does forked tongues mean in a scent-based experience? And, so the titles are very suggestive, and there's a big gap between what we know from the title, from the language, and then have with the smell experience. So working within that gap, the visitor really has to exert and stretch themselves, because usually smell experiences are very, very confined, or very, such as perfume. It's packaged, there's an advertising campaign, there's a certain use, but a smell dispersed into a room with a suggestive name, that's unknown territory in a way.
Thank you. I was just thinking about the sort of challenge of scent in the gallery, and wondering if anyone had had any experiences of being censored about their scent work, somehow being controlled or censored in some way.
You mentioned yesterday an example, huh?
Yeah. I think every smell artist has been censored in some way at some point in time. So Clara has a great example. And the one I talked about was gallery attendants who, were intransigent about letting a smell work appear in their space, but they were chain smokers. So, like not seeing the obvious danger of smoking cigarettes, but then the zero danger of, a very common smell. There's a big gap there. And, I explain it by odorphobia, which is just a kind of unnatural fear of scents. But Clara has a beautiful example.
Yeah, I think because I'd say probably about 3/4 of the stuff I do would be perceived as a malodor by most people. So one of my early works, and I won't say where or anything like that, but the curator put an onion in front of it because they thought that, in front of the mechanism that let the scent out, because they thought it was too strong, and they thought that the onion would absorb the scent. So just things like that, and then sometimes you want something to be strong, but there's a compromise that has to be reached with the curatorial team or the people in the museum that have to live with it. In terms of intensity and so on. So there's always something like that not always, but often.
There's no headphone for smell.
There's no headphone for smell, and it's really subjective. So you always have to make a decision, or a compromise, and a discussion has to happen. That's interesting. But and it does come. I think odorphobia is a good word to use for that.
I mean,
I don't understand if when you say gallery, you mean private galleries or the gallery as a place of the show?
I guess just when you told your story.
About the open doors. Okay. No. All right. No, because I was thinking about the private gallery that usually I don't know for you, but from my experience, it's quite impossible to show a smell in a private gallery because it's difficult to sell. And that is also, I like to go back to the question about the democratic idea of the smell. And I think that as a metaphor, as to follow this game about politics, I think that is more anarchist also because it's difficult to maintain in an edge because everybody could interpret it in own vision, the idea of the smell, and also because for the capitalistic idea of the artwork is one of the most difficult to control or to define. So.
But it's not the smell who is anarchistic, it's the gesture.
All right, yes.
So
right.
To come back to your question, there was this, there was always the discussion, is the music of Wagner fascist? Yes, because he was a fascist. And I would say there is no fascist tone. So there can't be a democratic smell, you know? A democratic can use a smell. A fascist can use a smell. But the smell is a smell. He's not political in a sense. He can't be used as a political weapon. He can be used as a political gesture, but from the sense is not political. Like music is not political. If Rage Against the Machine makes music, it becomes because of the attitude of the band. But this one riff or the D on the guitar is not fascist or democratic or anarchistic.
You know, you were saying about smell and capitalism. In a way, it's an within, I guess, the art market, perhaps, there's an anti-capitalist, perhaps, you know, that's not for me to decide. But on the other hand, I mean, I'm quoting David Howes again, but, you know, there's a line where he says, smell is the last sense to be colonized. And in a way, through sensory marketing, our sense of smell has been colonized, if I understood what he wrote correctly. So you know, on the one hand, you've got these scents that perhaps can't be marketed or can't be sold in a certain way. But then you've got the fragrance industry that takes a scent, and it's a multi-billion, not even $1 million industry, and they can take these molecules and package them in such a way and sell them. So it's kind of there's contradictions, and it's really difficult. Always with capitalism, it's always difficult. You know, it's just, and it constantly changes, and you kind of have to subvert
only
it.
to follow the game of to joking in a way.
Yeah,
with words, with ideas, metaphors. Of course not. Also, like, so what we could say about paintings, because it's more selling, is more capitalist. No, I mean Georges Grosz was not, but was only joking about the idea of the object like that. Also, and probably also because, in a way, all of three, we mentioned Marcel Duchamp.
Yeah.
The only artist that we mentioned in our speech. But anyway, so that means that the smell from Futurism, from Dadaism, start to be a sign in the art world or in the art history. But for sure, now is still the last things that the public could understand or could read like an artwork. But it's only something that probably the time will change, or who knows what happened in 20 years, I don't know. No, we can...
Something about the Marcel Duchamp is the easy example because it's the most documented artist you have of that period anyway. And he make I don't know how many smell pieces or working with a smell. They have few examples. So it's an easy example anyway to drop on the table this well-known artist and work if you wanted to bring some reference of olfactory art in the history. Thinking of why coincidentally well, you have Rosso, Carlos Carra, you have a lot of futurist art they touch as well the smell. And Jim mentioned yesterday as well a number of that. But Marcel always appear into the list. We touch everything. And the more referent one too. So it's very easy to bring him to the table as a...
But you can bring him always on the table. You know, I think there's no contemporary art production possible without the reference of Marcel Duchamp. I'm sorry. You know, for us, it's say art history starts with Marcel Duchamp. At least for me. So, but we learned last night, of course, you can misuse molecules. Even if you join the Deutsche Bahn that you have a better feeling with a 4 hours delay, you know? You don't want to kill somebody when you step out at the train station because you had this good feeling in the wagon, you know? Not excuse, not refreshing a good shine. No, you have a good smell. And of course, the molecules can be misused. But
maybe we...
I'm not sure. I remember this guy. What is the Essen guy? The Essen guy was talking about that? About the
Müller-Grünow was talking about it. But before we open up to train theory and economics, I would say we close the discussion and we can continue maybe having again a coffee. I would like to thank you all for your contributions. It was fantastic. I mean, some of us left already. We can't thank again, but it's wonderful to have your show and work still here until end of February, and to experience the show in a different way in Innsbruck, where you might also have the chance maybe to see and to compare and to share. And thank you for coming, for exchange, and yeah, we will see us with the next Smell event. Thank you.